So, welcome to the channel. I'm going to start this one off a little differently than I normally do, where I usually try to just get straight into the point, but in lieu of recent events, I just wanted to say thank you to everybody that has subscribed, liked, commented, and all that jazz. I was getting excited that I was going to hit like 500 subscribers by the end of the year, work towards getting monetized, but one video and now I'm sitting well over 1,000 subscribers at this point, so super stoked and I'm looking forward to bringing more content and showing my methodology for how I approach a situation, and sometimes, in most cases, develop something that's never existed. Or, in this case, which is probably why you're here today, make something for my specific needs that does exist but I can't buy. So with that, I'm going to talk a little bit about how I got here, and then we'll get into my 7 steps, I think, of how I make and design my own Kydex holsters. So, believe it or not, this was actually the first holster I ever made. It was actually the second one because the first one I had to make some slight tweaks and changes to it. But this was the first holster I ever attempted to make. This is a drop leg Safariland style holster with an active retention for my HK USP 45. So there's a little thumb that retains the gun. If you're in the gun biz, you probably have heard of Safariland. I'm pretty sure they only make holsters for like Glocks, SIGs, Berettas, probably a couple other ones that I can't name off the top of my head. But I'm an HK fanboy, and I wanted a holster, a drop leg holster, to hold my USP. So nobody makes one, especially with active retention. There's people that make drop leg holsters, but they don't make a drop leg holster that has a light or that has a cutout for a RMR. So yes, there are holsters that exist for this gun, but not in the configuration I wanted. So I'm not going to cover this one today. This is a very in-depth, engineering heavy, a lot of reverse engineering and figuring things out. I can cover that one in a later video. For this one, I want to cover the new holster I'm making, which is, again, a very unique handgun. Not crazy unique, but it's a niche handgun, I would say, where this is my HK P30 SK, and as you can see, I have a red dot Holosun 407C and an Olight Balder, however you say that, tack light. And nobody makes an IWB inside the waistband holster for this gun with this configuration. So I already had all the tools that I needed to make a holster. So a little bit of engineering in order to make this IWB for my specific needs, for my specific handgun. I'm going to show you how to make that. And then a lot of this will carry over into that more complex design, but we can cover that stuff at a later date. So before we get into making a holster, my 7 easy steps of how to do it, I just wanted to stress proper gun safety. Always make sure your mags are empty, your chamber's cleared, and you never point it somewhere where you don't intend to do harm. You want to protect those around you and also, most importantly, yourself. Holsters, typically, especially if you're making an IWB, this will be pointed at parts you don't want bullets to be pointed at by the nature of how the holster works. So with that, let's get into my 7 easy steps of how to make a holster. Step 1, get a gun. Step 2 is going to be to have a model of the gun. And the easiest way of doing that is with a 3D scanner. Now, yes, this costs some money. There are some free options that you use your cell phone. I used to use Scanniverse before I made the commitment and bought my 3D scanner. There will be a link down below if you want to buy your own. Or you can spend a lot of hours measuring and putting your gun into CAD. Once you have your model and you're in CAD, step 3 is to begin modeling your holster. Or I like to start with a blank and then I cut it and rotate it and turn it into my holster cards, as I've been calling them. Once you have your holster card designed, then we roll into step 4, which is 3D printing. 3D printing, I'm going to go over it very briefly, talk about what materials I use, the settings, and kind of just move on from there. This is not a channel to learn how to 3D print. There's so many people out there that are way better at 3D printing than I am. I'm just an amateur. So on to step 5. Now that we have our 3D print, we can roll into vacuum forming, which is probably a large reason why most of you are here. The vacuum forming setup I made is really simple. It's a pump that came with a reservoir, some air lines, and a couple fittings, and one sheet of aluminum. I'll go through and explain that more later on in the video of how I set that up. There'll be links for everything down below, don't worry. Everything I used, so you guys can replicate this as well. So with the vacuum forming done, I'll put a picture right here of what it looks like right after it comes off the table. Now we can get into step 6, which is going to be our initial rough out. So we'll jump on either a bandsaw, a Dremel, whatever you have at your disposal to cut it up, and over onto the belt sander and just kind of clean it up and start to work in our shape, which is kind of where I'm at now, where I have my holster. I've aligned both of the front and the back, and I've started getting my final shape. So once you're here at the end of step 6, now we're going to be moving on into step 7, which is going to be final fitting and mold adjustments. But we'll get into that, and I think the biggest thing to take away that I've seen from making holsters is know you're not going to get it right the first time. This first holster, I did a good job that I got it right the second time. This one is like my 3rd one I've made, and I'm really happy with how it's coming out. Don't get discouraged, make adjustments, and keep moving forward. Let's get into the rest of the video. All right, so to keep this simple and short, I'm going to give you a couple tips that I use for 3D scanning small objects. Now for starters, these are just 8.5 by 11 sheets of paper, and I put a bunch of the target dots all over them. I use these frequently and just keep them in my carry case where my 3D scanner lives. For handguns specifically, I designed these little stands. It just mimics the size of the mag well and the angle of the handgun. So now you can insert it, and the handgun stands up nice, and it's really easy to orbit around and do your 3D scanning. A big part of 3D scanning is not having a reflective, glossy surface. Unfortunately, most handguns, or guns in general, have that issue. In order to mitigate and make the gun more matte, I use baby powder. I chose Johnson's. It's soft on baby's bottoms. All joking aside, this stuff works really well. I have 2 ways that I like to apply the baby powder. First one is just crack it open, sprinkle it on like it's Parmesan cheese, and try to get all the glossy surfaces. If you want to go the step farther and make sure you have really good coating, I usually do a 1-to-1 mixture of baby powder to rubbing alcohol in a spray bottle, and then you can spray it on. It goes on a little wet, and after like 30 seconds or so, after the alcohol vapors off, you're left with a very consistent, smooth surface of baby powder. Now after you do that, make sure you wash your gun and then properly lubricate it and make sure it all functions properly. As far as scanning goes, those are my big tips on how to scan a firearm adequately. So real quick, at least in the Shining 3D software, prior to you exporting it, you're going to want to come up here to your measurement tab. And in your measurement tab, you can create features, and you're going to want to put a dot, so you create a dot. You're going to want to create a line that goes off of a body line. So I'm just going to choose here on the slide to here on the slide. I have a line, and then I'm going to use same thing, 3 points on the top of the slide. Now I have a plane. With those 3, you can come to a line, and now you can organize your coordinate plane, which will become really important when we get into the CAD aspect of things, where you select your plane, plane 1, line 1, point 1, you press align, and now it's not necessarily in the direction we want. I like having Z up, so we'll go Z plus, align, and now the front of the gun is square to the X and Y, and Z is pointed straight up. This will help out a lot, and I didn't know about this feature before, so when I first got things into Fusion, I'm constantly having to adjust and tweak and change the angle. This will pay off dividends when you get into modeling. So now on to step 3, where we have our gun, we have our model, whether you got it offline, you 3D scanned it, or you measured it all yourself. Now it's time to get it into CAD and start locating and building out our holster card, as I like to call them. To start, as long as you did that little 3-point alignment at the end in your scanning software, you can do it very simply. Where you're going to come up, you're going to insert a mesh, select from your computer, you're going to pick your file, and that's really critical. If you can see here where it's oriented on the coordinate plane and in line with the Y, the gun is perfectly in line. That is critical for the designing process. Now, if you use like the Scaniverse and you can't align it to the coordinate plane, it's not the end of the world. It's just going to take a lot of shifting and angling and slowly getting it defined in a way that you can have it be perpendicular or parallel to the axes, depending on how you look at it. But the biggest thing when importing a mesh into Fusion is making sure your units are correct. Now, the units that come out of the Shining 3D are in millimeter, and Fusion likes to start off with it in inches. If you do that, this thing is going to be like 100 times or whatever times bigger than it's supposed to be. So make sure to select millimeter when importing it. Now that you have it imported, and if you aligned it right, your coordinate plane is sitting right at the front of the gun. This goes into the next part, which is really repetitive and just a matter of extruding the length of the gun, where I like to start with a sketch on the front, and you have this nice clear shape that it needs to be. I will start with a construction line. Make it vertical. And then I'm actually going to cheat and I'm going to lock it in place. Because what you see is that I made it center line to the gun. So from here, now I can do all of my drawings where I want, go back and make sure we come out of construction. And I'm just going to do this quick so it's not super precise. So now we have the one. We're going to take all this and we're going to mirror it around this line. Now it's going to give us our first piece to extrude. And we're just going to slowly extrude this entire body. And we're going to watch as we go down the side to look for anything that changes. So like right here, we're about to run into the slide release on both sides. So I'm going to stop here before anything changes. Press OK. And I like to jump in and grab a section view of just what I care about. So now you can see the profile has changed. If we look at it from the back, the profile here is about to change. So this next part is just make another sketch. And we're going to continue this down. We're going to square it off so it looks nice. Repeat a similar shape. You know, some guns are different. Mine has ampy, ampy controls where it has a mag release on both sides. So not going to go crazy with it. And then we just continue extruding. We'll hide our analysis. And we'll just continue extruding until something changes. So now we're getting to the other end of the mag release, sorry. And I'm just going to slowly do that for the entire gun, all the way back. So this was the file that I worked off of to make the holster that you guys saw in the beginning of the video. Now, I scanned everything separately, and I actually ended up pulling this off of GrabCAD. This is just a Trijicon RMR. I didn't have my optic yet or have it mounted on the gun when I was designing this, so I downloaded something just to have kind of a placeholder until I got my actual optic. But as you saw just a second ago, what you want to do is just slowly take your front profile and extrude it all the way out, and as you have artifacts, whatever you want to call it, on the side of the firearm that bump out, you then give them an uninterrupted path to go out the back. You don't want to be coming out and around like the mag release or the slide release, because then you can't pull the handgun out of the holster. So before I make the holster card, I start with a dummy gun, which is just doing more of what I had done before, where I start at the front at the barrel and I just slowly, continuously extrude until I get all the geometry to come out the back. And then as you see, I have fillets over everything. Do that all at the end. Get all your rough geometry put in first, and then fillet everything at the end. Once you have your dummy gun made, this is where the actual holster idea starts to get made. For this one, I wanted to do an inside the waistband holster with a spare mag. So that also turned into me having to measure, and I actually ended up just modeling a rough layout, because it just has to be close, of my P30SK magazine. All right, so now we've slowly worked through and we have our dummy gun modeled out. And now the next step is going to be to slice this in half and make our two halves of the holster form, or the holster card. I like to do this in the construction plane. You can make a mid plane, so that gives you a construction plane in the middle of two halves. So whatever gets you split right down the middle, you can do that. Or if you were smarter about your orientation, about the origin, and you have that center line, you could just use the origins planes as well. And so now from here, we can jump in and use a splitting tool. We select the body, and then we come down and we select the plane. And now we have two halves. So that's one half. And then you rinse and repeat for the magazine, so you get only half of the magazine. And then we have to start considering things about how the vacuum form is going to lay up after. So now I'm going to do my little Rachel Ray moment here, and I'm just going to go to my upper and lower molds that I've already created. So now all I did is, you saw me split that body. I did that for both the mag and the dummy gun. And then I literally just making a rough shape of looking at what other IWBs look like and trying to replicate that the best I can. And then this is the important part to consider. When the holster lays up, this plane here, this plane, I want to touch. So the inside of the Kydex is on this plane. So when I make the lower mold, I can't have it land on this one because then there'd be a really big gap. In this case, it's 1/8 of an inch. It's way too big. So when I make the lower mold, you see how they overlap? So see how the upper mold comes down and is here, and the lower mold comes above. That way, when you make the two forms, their interface is line to line, so they will touch together, and you'll be able to not have this big massive gap, and you'll have a really loose holster. So I know that was probably really quick and a lot of information. I'm trying to keep this short so I can get over the entire process. I could spend literally hours explaining my methodology on how I do this CAD. If that's something you're interested in, make sure to leave a comment down below and I'll try to address that in a future video. All right, so now we're going to jump into our slicer. I use the Orca slicer as it's good for controlling printers that aren't just Bambu Lab printers, because I have Bambu Lab printers and a couple Creality printers that are heavily modified, and I still get a lot of use out of them. But I'm going to take my two files, drag and drop them into Orca Slicer. I'm going to orient them, and then I'm going to use the auto spacing. It puts onto two different build plates because it doesn't fit. In my Bambu Lab printer, I'm using a 0.4mm nozzle, and with a 0.4mm nozzle, I'm going to do 6 to 8 wall loops, and then 8 to 10 layers. Your infill doesn't really matter what type it is, as long as you're not using like lightning. But gyroid, cubic, square, literally any of them with like a 15 to 20% density should do fine for this application. Now, I use PLA Plus. It works great. You can probably get 4 or 5 holsters out of it, but over time, the heat from the Kydex sheet, as you lay it over it, is going to start to smooth out the corners on the print. So if you're going to be making a lot of these and not just one-offs like I am, then you're going to want to use like PETG or ASA, ABS. I don't think you need to go as far as using like a nylon or a carbon fiber nylon, but sticking with PETG or ASA is probably going to be your best bet if you're going to make a lot of these. Now, I've already printed these, so I'm going to head down to the basement and we're going to work on going through my vacuum forming setup. All right, so here we are coming into step 5 of how to make a holster. We're going to be taking our newly 3D printed holster card, or form, whatever you want to call it, and we're going to be vacuum forming a sheet of Kydex. Over it. Now you're going to need a couple things, and I put links down in the description below for all of this. Everything except for the toaster. I couldn't find this exact toaster, and I don't want to tell you guys to buy a toaster and be wrong about it. So do your own research and find a toaster that fits. You should just be able to get away with a toaster that can fit a 12-inch pizza, as this sheet is a 12-inch sheet of Kydex, 12-inch by 12-inch. There'll be links for this as well down in the description below. But I'm going to run through. I've already done the vacuum forming, so I'm not going to do it at this moment, but I did take videos and I'll stitch them over as I talk about the process. So with that, I'm going to work on just getting this set up so I can go over the piping for you guys. All right, so really quickly, let's go over the layout. As you saw me just pull it all out and set everything up, it goes rather quick. You have a vacuum pump, it gets plugged into the wall. You have a hose that gets plugged into your chamber or reservoir. This manifold came with the kit, so if you buy a different kit, your experiences may vary. But you get this kit, and normally there is a vent filter on this end. Now I chose to remove that filter and plumb in my own 8mm air hose. That air hose comes into the bottom of this aluminum plate. This is just a 1/4 inch thick, 15-inch by 15-inch aluminum plate. And on the bottom side, I drilled and tapped for a 1/4 inch NPT. It's a quick push to connect, air fitting. This is just a couple pieces of plywood because when this sits on the table, it doesn't have room for the hose to not impart on the table. It's a nice little base, quick and easy. I didn't spend a bunch of time on it. Now, a big tip when doing this, you want to get yourself a piece of chicken wire, or this is technically hardware cloth, an old screen from a window, because when you put your mold down, you need to have channels for the air to go. That way, everything can be sucked down, because if you don't, this nice flat surface can actually get sucked down into this one hole in the center, and then you don't actually draw any of the air down, and this just gets stuck. And now you have a hot piece of Kydex that's started to take shape, and you have no way to unseal it. So take this piece of advice from my learning experience. Put your sheet down, put your mold. Now you're going to heat up your Kydex. Heating up your Kydex, I set my oven to about 350, 375 degrees Fahrenheit. I don't have a set time that I put the Kydex in for. It is a couple minutes, but during the process of having the Kydex in there, with some frequency, a minute or two, I will open the oven, and I have my little thermometer, my IR thermometer, and I just shoot the surface. I shoot the surface of the Kydex, and I found what works best for me is looking for about 300 degrees Fahrenheit. Once you have the surface at that temperature, you'll also notice that the Kydex starts to give and relax and gets really flimsy. Once you're there, you pull your Kydex sheet out, you drop it on top, like so. It'll be flexy and flimsy. And then you take your ring. I just use some 80/20 and some corner brackets, and I put it in this configuration so I can adjust it for whatever size if I decide to use a smaller sheet of Kydex so I don't waste a bunch like some have pointed out. But you put your hot piece of Kydex down, you drop this ring on top and push down just a little bit, doesn't have to be crazy, and then you open up your vacuum valve while you just apply a little bit of pressure. And the nice thing with the reservoir, or this big cylinder, is there's a lot of volume, or rather lack of volume, compared to using just the pump. The pump will take time. It isn't a lot of air volume, so using just the pump is probably fine, but I wanted it to be instantaneous. In some of my molds, I have rather complex geometries, and the quicker the Kydex can get sucked down, the better. So this came with the pump anyways. It was just as much money to buy just the pump, so I bought this kit, and it works. It's so fast it looked fake when I rewatched the video that I posted a week ago. All right, so I think that's all that I can think of for how to set it up and tips and tricks for this part of the process. I'm going to leave this here. I'll put a couple of videos of this actually getting drawn down and the Kydex sheets formed, and then we'll jump into the next part of the video. All right, so we are almost caught up to where I currently am in the build. As you just saw in the last couple clips, I was over on the bandsaw and then over on the belt sander to just rough out these shapes. Now this is the step immediately after that where I got those roughed out. There were no holes in them now, but it was time to get these lined up so I could do the final trimming and get it to where it currently sits. So I got it really close for both of them. They didn't line up. One of them bumped out more than the other, and so I still had a little bit of work to do. But to do the next step, I want to make sure that these are perfectly lined up so I can have one nice continuous edge. To do that, I got my 2 halves and I lined it up the best I could. Then I took my magazine and I inserted it into my holster. I did it by hand. I'd recommend putting some sort of clamp, either a woodworking clamp or just some of those toe clamps that would grab onto this, and it'll hold it exactly lined up how you want it. From here, you're able to put it down on the table. I was a bit of a gorilla and I used a step bit. You want to be very careful, as I've learned through mistakes, is if you're going to use a step bit in Kydex, the second it hooks up, it can suck the step bit right into the Kydex and now you have a massive hole. So be very careful if you use a step bit. I'd recommend using either a M4 or M5 drill bit, or 1/8 inch drill bit, 3/16 inch drill bit for my American compatriots, to make these holes, depending on what size Chicago screw you use. But once you have at least these 2 center holes, you can bolt these 2 holes together, and then you can take your mag out, take your clamp off, and you can drill your other holes. And then once you have all those holes done, you can bolt it all together so it doesn't move at all, and do your final sanding, polishing over on the belt sander, so that way you get one nice continuous edge that goes around the entire thing. To do the next part, I'm going to go ahead and reinstall my screws for all intents and purposes, because at this point, you guys have roughed it out, you've drilled the holes, and now that it's lined up and bolted together, you've done your final sanding to get it to this point. And the next is where we're going to get into step 7, which is final polishing and adjustments of the mold. Okay, so now you have your holster, and you're noticing it's rather planar, so it's flat. You are planning to do what I'm going to do with this and use it as an IWB holster. You're going to have this up against your stomach, and most holsters have a curve to them. So I don't have a heat gun or anything at my disposal, but I do have a sort of MAP gas blowtorch. So I'm going to set my blowtorch to the lowest temperature, and I'm just going to slowly heat up the center part right here. So I start it high, and then I slowly back it down, basically until the torch is going to basically completely go out. And then from there, I'm going to start really far away, and I'm going to come in close, probably about 6 inches or so, and that's going to be enough to get the material to soften up. And I just keep moving. Don't dwell in one spot too long, because you can just burn up the ABS. And every so often, just give it a little bend and see if it's starting to give yet. Hit it with a little more heat. That's all it took. Now I've got a nice curvature to it, so it'll stick to my stomach a lot better. Turn our torch off, and we'll get into the next steps. A little trick, whenever you're heating and making adjustments to your holster, I like to keep an air compressor with an air gun nearby, so that way you can quickly cool down your part, so that way it doesn't bend back and relax to a spot you don't want it. Now that I've made this bend, the material has stretched and changed. So my magazine doesn't quite want to go in. It is a very tight fit, and it's not going to come out. But I'm just going to, again, come back with my blowtorch, because it's what I have. And I'm going to slowly heat up some of these areas and just try to reform and possibly even flare this out just a little bit, so my magazine goes in easier. And then it'll be rinse and repeat over here for my handgun. So you can see that the handgun doesn't want to go in at all, and we can definitely get it to go in. So there's gonna be a little bit more adjustments. I'm gonna time lapse this because I'm sure it's gonna take me a little bit. And then that's basically it. Now it's just little minor tweaks in getting through this. So as you just saw, I made a minor adjustment to the mag well. I could see that the mag well had squeezed in a little bit. And so all I did was I heated up the front edge on the front and the back. And then I was able to insert the mag, which flared it out basically as much as it needed. And then I just tamed it with my screwdriver because I'm not wearing gloves and it is rather warm. And I just used that to massage this area so I could squeeze that material back together. And I'm pretty happy with how the mag gets retained, doesn't fall out. I think I have room to add in rubber washers, which a lot of holsters use. They'll purposefully leave a large gap between the two molds, so that way there's a negative interference if you had fully bolted it together like I did. But then they add rubber washers in between the screws. And what the rubber washers do is it lets you tighten the screws down farther and farther and farther until you get to the retention level that you like. Now I'm trying to do that without it, but we'll see if I end up getting there. It's kind of the same thing where when I made this bend, it pulled this material, and so this front part of the handgun holster shrunk down. So now when I go to put my handgun in, it doesn't fit. So all I'm going to do is heat up this area along the sight rail of the handgun and get that nice and loose, and then I'm going to shove my gun inside of the holster and force it back open. I don't know if you can see those little flare-ups, but that was me getting the Kydex a little too hot for it. As you can see, that opened it up really nicely, and I want to come back in and just add this detail back for the ejection port. Oof. So it is very tight. So we might be reducing some of this, all that tension I added back in here is hooking the handgun in there really well. So I might try adding the rubber washers here and just keep working and tuning this until it gets to be where I want it. If you really care about the cosmetics, then I would not use a blowtorch and try to use a heat gun. If you have the right heat gun, you can still melt your ABS and wind up with the same result. I'm going to mess with this some more off camera, and once I get it all fine-tuned, we'll talk about it at the very end. All right, so here it is. This is the finished holster. I did do a little bit more adjusting, as I said, off camera, where I heated this area up in here, and this front part was what was really binding and making it really tight to come out. So I heated this area up and just put my gun halfway in. That way it would expand this section out, and cooled it with my air gun, and then rolled on into, I added two washers, two of the rubber washers, these guys, into the center, and you know, it all gets retained nice, it doesn't fall out. And then it was just a matter of picking the right height for my belt loops, so that way the gun cants how I want it. I'm going to play with it a little bit more. That's why I didn't trim these up yet. But once I find exactly the height and angle and stuff I like of these two, which they have like 6 holes so you can adjust the height. Once I find which one I like, I'll go back in and cut these and sand them down so it's nice and polished. Now, this probably doesn't look like the prettiest holster you've ever seen, but it's very functional. And ultimately, I did it because I already had all the materials from my other holster I built. If this interests you or you want more information on more specific areas, I could probably do a video for each one of these steps and go so far in depth that people are going to be bored out of their minds, but you would have all the information you need to adequately do this. I think I gave everybody enough information that they should be able to do this themselves. But if you need more, feel free to jump in the comment section. Make sure to like, follow, and subscribe. Like, follow, and subscribe in order to get more updates as I post more videos. Thanks for hanging around. I'll see you guys in the next one. Dawned on me after I shot the ending, I didn't show you what it looks like on me. By no means am I a small guy, so hiding this is rather easy, but I love how it came out. It feels rather comfortable, you know, crouching, moving, sitting. It's not too bad. Definitely a couple little adjustments to be made, but it's really easy to get my hand completely into the grip. I can pull it out, present, go right back in. Then even if I throw on a jacket, completely gone. Once again, thanks for hanging around.